Welcome to Entrepreneurs, Executives, and Eccentrics, a podcast dedicated to the stories, strategies, and secrets of remarkable individuals. Join us as we engage in enlightening conversations with intriguing entrepreneurs, accomplished executives, and fascinating eccentrics, exploring their journeys, triumphs, and the unconventional wisdom that has shaped their success. In this episode, we talk with Andrejka Bernatova, an investor who leads Dynamics and works across energy infrastructure and digital assets. We trace her move from global finance to Houston and how grit shaped her path into the energy world. We get into how she reads people, what she expects from partners, and how she builds businesses with discipline. We also explore rising power demand from AI and how it reshapes the future of energy.
Hello, Andrejka. Tell me who you are and what you do.
Hi, Scott. Andrejka. I am a investor in energy infrastructure, power, digital assets, and have a platform called Dynamics. We have two different parts of Dynamics. One is the public piece, Dynamics Corporation, where we house our series of SPACs, our SPAC franchise. And then Dynamics Capital Partners, where we house our private investments, mostly again in the energy infrastructure, anything sort of services and infrastructure feeding AI, data centers, digital assets. We've been at it for 20 years. I've been at it for over 20 years and, really excited to speak to you today, Scott.
So, it's interesting. I'm looking through your career and it's storied, right? You know, it's like a Credit Suisse and you're kind of moving your way through the ranks and it feels like, did you specialize in energy early on or was that, or did you kind of gravitate toward that?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think that, like anything in my life, pretty much, energy didn't come easily to me. I was initially a finance person. Well, very initially, I was a political science major in college. Yes, I had aspirations to become an ambassador or, some sort of politician. And then I did my junior year in college, I did a ambassador internship and realized I am not well suited to be sort of number two or listening to orders and, fulfilling what others want. So that was good for me to realize that political career initially at my stage is, or diplomatic career would not be a good choice. Anyway, so quickly steered after graduation from Harvard to realize I want to get a technical skill set, and that was finance. So you're right, I started as an investment banker at Credit Suisse. Certainly the two most hard-working years of my life, and I don't remember most of my time at Credit Suisse, but I would say I owe incredible amount to that platform, to that team, and learned probably the most in my life and probably got the best network of my life at Credit Suisse. So Credit Suisse and Morgan Stanley, finance. And then when I was about 28 or so, close to my 30s, I took a step back, Scott, and I realized, well, I've touched energy a lot of times through deals and investments in my career. And I'm really excited about energy infrastructure. And I think there's a lot of, technology meets capital, meets different kinds of people from the PhDs to, guys that work in the field. And I just love that aspect. And I want to specialize in energy and infrastructure. And I deliberately took a step to move to Houston. If you want to do energy, you got to be in Houston and build a career around that ecosystem.
Yeah, and I wonder if the original poli-sci major, right? I wonder if that helped you a lot. Okay, I mean, because when I think of diplomats, I just think they're all spies, right? For the most part. I also worked for the DoD for quite some time at the Pentagon, so I know a little bit about it, right? But when I think of it, you're basically you're there for reasons, right? But sometimes it's more than just diplomatic reasons. But I wonder if that type of training gave you the kind of kung fu that was kind of natural and the kind of glad handing and back and forth it takes to do what you do now.
It's interesting, Scott, and I say this to my own kids, and I try to instill this in my own kids. I've been very lucky to be in fundamentally very different environments throughout my life. And, I grew up in the Czech Republic in a very small village, very working class environment. And then I left languages. So at some point I learned to speak 7 languages. I lived in, Chile, I lived in Egypt, I lived in Abu Dhabi, I lived in Africa, I lived in Switzerland. And so, and not only that, that international component, but really living in different, spheres of socioeconomic, racial, and, religion, and, different types of people from a political spectrum around the world. I think that's something that really helped me in, rolling with anybody, right? I don't care who you are. And if you are able to be in different environments, I give you an example. I like telling this story. I remember moving to Egypt. And when I moved there, I thought the way that they did things didn't make any sense. When I left the place, I left it thinking this makes total sense. The way you do things is completely logical, and I totally get it. So I think that helped me sort of being able to move in different environments and do fundamentally very different things, because you learn how other people think, what their aspirations are, what their needs are, right? And so that very much translates into energy, power, and to any industry, understanding where, a guy who works in the field is coming from, and the guy who is producing new technology at MIT is coming from, and what he wants to do.
It's interesting. Czech Republic reminds you a little bit of Belgium. They've been the center of the universe in Europe for a very long time. It's from Bohemian for whatever, right? But World War II, World War One, 100-year war, 20-year war, 25-year war, 50-year war, 100-year attrition, War of Secession. It's kind of all revolved around that area of the world. And it's like it's almost that the whatever reason Belgians and the Czechs naturally just they all speak 5 languages, and I never understood it. Right? It's just like a natural. It's like genetically built into you guys.
It's interesting. I go back every year to the Czech Republic, so I have like a window into Europe, and specifically Eastern Europe, every year, right? And I see kind of how it progress, and as you get older, you can take a step back and think about aspects that you didn't notice before, and a couple of things that are probably similar, Belgium and Czech Republic, and frankly, any small nation in the world is you kind of have to, roll with the flow, right? Because we were under the Austrians, the Germans, and, Russians, and, et cetera, et cetera. So you kind of have a different boss, if you will, every few decades. And so that kind of teaches you how to be flexible, number one. But I do think that those small nations, you also learn how to take risks, because you kind of are oppressed, and, at times, and you got to sometimes take the risk and have a hard stand. And I think that's fundamental, as again, something I teach my kids. You got to take risks in life. It's just fundamental. And the third piece, Scott, that's interesting is, we hustle, right? You got to have the hustle factor. Don't be afraid. You're a small nation. I come from a small village, so I really had to kind of, not be afraid to reach out to people that I don't know, that probably will say no to me, since a very, very early age. But that hustle factor, I feel it's really important, feeling you are nobody, that's fine, but you can be somebody one day, and it's your own doing that's going to take you there. I mean, I just told my son the other day, he plays hockey, and I told him, hey, I never wait for the puck to get back to me. Never. I get the puck, I go after the puck, and, in the process, I may die, but you can be sure that I'm going to get that puck. I'm never going to wait for somebody to get that to me.
Yeah, I mean, much like it's and another one more thing that's similar is that you've been next to the Austrian-Hungarian Empire for 1,000 years, and that's like being next to the big giant wolf who's got rocket launchers on their back, right? I mean, you're in a very rough neighborhood, for historically speaking, and it's a very small country as far historically speaking. So so you make your way through your career, Credit Suisse, you've been in that top 1% of the kind of we'll just call it whatever investment organizations, right? And at some point you went on your own, right? When did that happen, and how did you do that?
Yeah, so it took me about 15 years of my career of working, really, really hard. And my 20s, I don't remember my 20s, and they were very miserable. I had, very limited fun, and but I did feel that I set the stage sort of for having the ability to take the risk, in my late 30s, I would say, Scott. So took the leap of faith. I mean, taking a step back, maybe the first sort of taking risk and going on our own was really jumping from the finance sector, from, banking and private equity and very large organizations into smaller businesses. So building a number of different businesses, took them public, had a number of strategic exits, private equity exits, partnering with a number of different private equity shops, building different businesses along the essentially energy and infrastructure value chain, from, fossil fuels midstream to water to power and resiliency. And so touching different pieces, which I'm really grateful for. So really not ultra specializing in one small arena. And then, finally, after being a finance person, investor, and an operator, I felt that I'm well weaponized and having the right toolkit to actually take the leap of faith and truly go on my own. So about 5 years ago, formed our platform that's now called Dynamics. Like I said at the beginning, and have had series of SPACs. It's not easy to work well in the SPAC market. It's a very difficult product. It's very widely misused. It doesn't work in most instances, but it has a role in the space. And if you do use it well, it can create an enormous value for investors and for operators. And then on the private side, we have a very operational mindset, Scott. So when we invest, the platforms that we are looking at is, I feel very strongly that our, investors should be paying us fees for actually value creation beyond just sourcing an investment, right? Is being heavily involved with the team commercially, from an M&A perspective, from grooming, exit parties and exit avenues perspective years before that exit happens. And, obviously balance sheet, that's our bread and butter. So feel very strongly in being kind of playing in a tandem with the management team, and our views, my views, and the rest of the team is we come at it as operators. How do you build a business, right, from ground up, and what's the real value add that you can have as an investor, as an outside party, adding some very important incremental pieces to the puzzle.
Yeah, and please tell me if I'm wrong, but the way that I've always have understood SPAC is that you were really heavily investing in the jockey, not the horse, because the horse doesn't exist, right? What you're doing is it's trust in the management team that they know where the money is, and there isn't necessarily an investment thesis quite yet. Or I'm wrong? Or is that incorrect?
You are correct. That's how most SPACs, I would define, look at the SPAC market. Now, that's not how we look at the SPAC market. So when you look at majority of SPACs, first of all, vast majority, don't ever do a transaction. They just essentially raise capital, both private and public, and then are never able to consummate a deal. It's not easy. I have many CEOs, former CEOs, and former private equity people who are calling me, very recently, because SPACs are, it's sort of a volatile vehicle. You have kind of revival, and then you have a bust, and it goes back up again. And I tell a lot of folks, to do SPAC well, it's extremely difficult. And so it's a lot of the times a sure way to finish your career on a negative note. So unless you are really willing to roll up your sleeves and do the work, don't do it, because it's a high potential to fail. We somehow figure out a, very successful path and ingredients, or, a repeatable success that very few people are able to do. But I would say you have to be extremely diligent in making sure that the deal you want to do is a high quality deal, and you are merging with a company that should be public no matter what. It is not last resort. You should be, taking companies public that should be public in the first place. It's a lot of the times that does not happen with SPACs. SPACs sometimes come too early, I mean, out of the targets in our last SPAC, or two SPACs before, we looked at about 350 different companies, Scott, and 347 of them, I said, don't do SPAC. I built a business before. It's not going to be on my watch that I'm going to let you destroy your business. I know how hard it is. So I think you have to be very disciplined in selecting the right business, and you have to be very disciplined in helping to raise the capital for that business. So it's not just the management team, we should be involved. That's why we created sort of an ecosystem of our investors in the SPAC that are, people who've been very well versed with public and private investors, repeat successful track record, and know what it takes to not only build a public business, but continue to run a successful public business. So I would say you need to be, as a SPAC, person, you should be very disciplined in finding the right targets, and you should be very involved in taking the business public, making sure they have the right toolkit, making sure you help with the fundraise that is instrumental, and that the capital structure is well positioned for the success of the company, out of the gate and looking into the next 2 to 5 years of a true healthy public business.
Yes, because the wrong reasons would be, well, let's get the original guys out of the deal because they want to need an exit, right? It's not necessarily the best investment thesis, or it's not necessarily the capital intensive reasons that you would go do it. I mean, what are some really bad reasons then to go public?
One bad reason is you have no other options. That is a very bad reason. You should not do that. It's a very serious business, and you are very much in the public lens, and I think a lot of people don't realize it. Number two is, you're right, it's just a tool to exit. And so sometimes you are seeing, valuation, you saw it in that kind of 2022, 2021, 2023 crop. I can get the best valuation for the company. And I often explain to companies, it's a very simple concept, but a lot of companies and even backers don't understand that concept. Higher valuation means you're going to get less capital raised, means your price is going to go down, which means it's going to constrain your business. You're not going to be able to access capital along the way, which, by the way, is the biggest, if not, one of the biggest benefits of being public, is the ability to continue to raise capital and access multiple different pockets of capital from equity side as well as debt, et cetera, et cetera. But higher valuation, less capital, less liquidity, you're actually going to kill your own business.
So the valuations, okay. So they overshoot the valuation by, let's pretend it's $100, right? They overshoot it to $300, but the real value is really 100. And
Right.
as a result, that second, third, fourth, fifth, when you go back for more, the well is dry.
Yes.
Right? There's nothing to go sell because you overestimated this, that, and the other. Okay, now I understand. That's really it's very interesting. You really want to be a little spot on, it sounds like, in terms of valuation, just so you can actually create value right during the course of business, and then go back for more money, et cetera, et cetera. So let's go back to why you went to Houston for a moment. Is it Permian Basin and Eagle Ford Shale? Like, are you there for the shale revolution? Like, what brought you there specifically in terms of Houston?
Well, number one, it's, I do think obviously London and Houston, and I would say Houston is true, capital of the energy. I mean, I guess, Midland maybe it has its,
Here. Yeah.
minor. If you watch The Landman, I love that show, by the way, recommend it highly. Gives you a taste of, of the oil patch and how hard that life is. It's really not easy. But I wanted to go to Houston because I wanted to make sure that I'm in the middle of the mix. And, I got to say one thing, Scott, traditional energy sometimes doesn't have a good reputation. But I tell you one thing, I mean, there is not another community that I was more welcome. I came, woman, weird accent, lived in all these places around the world, speak, multiple different languages, coming from these big institutions. I would say, definitely Houston and Midland are the places. When I say the word Harvard, they're like, nobody cares. Show me what you can do. Right. And I would say the biggest thing probably that I came for to Houston was, and Texas, I think, and in general, it's a place where people fail over and over and they get up and they get going again. One of my mentors in oil and gas, once said, I don't want to have any partnership with you. I don't want to employ you until you fail. Like, you need to have an epic failure, and then, then we can talk. And so when you go to Texas, people, you fail, people are going to say, oh, okay, great. What's next? Versus, in a lot of other places, you're going to be sort of outside of society. Nobody's going to want to talk to you, and they'll pretend that they don't know you. I mean, from that perspective, I think that entrepreneurial mindset I can do it myself. That trust, that community is very small. And yeah, there's no other community that accepted me more ever in the world than the Texas, energy community. So I came there really, it was part of the shale revolution. A lot of stuff was going on. But, from major reason was that entrepreneur mindset that I don't think exists in many places in the world. That's kind of the epicenter of America almost. That's where US was always, and hopefully will continue to head in that direction.
Yeah, I was born and raised in Houston. So I know a little bit about the mentality there, and I think that goes back to the when everything is great and you act one way, they want to understand what happens when the first shot's fired, right? When
Yes.
things completely go off the rails, because that's almost more important. It's going to happen less, hopefully, but it's also incredibly important because how you act can ruin everything forever, right? How you act in a stressful situation or when shit hits the fan, that is incredibly important, and that kind of peace of mind and the ability to act under pressure, that's super important.
And I tell you, I mean, I love watching sports. I mean, my kids, I have small kids and I'm learning a lot about sports, but sports teaches you a lot about life too. And so I see my professional life and I see my kids, sports life now. And a lot of it has a lot of kind of, interconnection. And the one thing that, again, going back to hockey, because it's such a fast sport, you have to intuitively react to situations. One thing I tell my kids before they get on the ice, I say, look, I mean, a lot of the times people say, "Hey, Scott, go be confident." Confidence is not something you can teach somebody. It comes with time and experience. But what you can say to your kids or to yourself is, when I get on that ice, you can't kill me. There is nothing that will happen that can destroy me. And that's just much more powerful, right? And so it's the same thing that happens with starting a business or any kind of work you do. Is when I go and start that business, it's going to be so hard. And I'm going to have times that I don't want to do it and I don't want to wake up and, I don't have a business card. I was joking with my team the other day. I'm like, well, finally, we should get business cards, right? Like if you are at Credit Suisse or Blackstone or Harvard, you are like, okay, yeah, look at me. I have, I'm a big shot. But, some of the biggest moments for me in life were when I was showing up at cocktail parties, at industry events, and I don't have a business card and I'm just myself. But you know what? When I get on that ice, you can't kill me. And I'm going to continue to get up despite the tough environment. And we are going to continue to execute and we are going to continue to fight. And if you have that attitude, there's literally nothing in my personal or professional life that happened, where I set my mind towards a goal and I have not achieved it. Nothing ever. It may have deviated a little bit, but it was always in that same zip code that I determined I'm going to end up. And so I do think that it works, and brain is the most powerful organ in your body, and you can control your future. I know it sounds sort of naive maybe, but I've done it and I think others can do it too.
Yeah, there was a study back in the 80s and 90s, and it was hundreds and hundreds of kids, and they followed them all the way through into adulthood. It's very rare to have that type of real good data, and they were looking for what makes successful adults. What can you kind of instill in children at a young age that makes a successful adult? And it turns out it's grit, GRIT, the ability to keep getting up no matter what happens. You got to get up. You got to get up. And that's, I mean, I've interviewed, I don't know, probably 100 people in the last 6 months to a year, and that seems to be the only real difference is what happened when things went off the rails, right? And you don't give up. That's the difference between success and failure, because we're going to fail eventually. It's just a matter of time. And at what level, right? There's obviously levels of failure, and it's what you do, again, back to what you do when things go off the rails is what really matters.
And I think, one more thing, Scott, sorry to interject, but the other piece that's super important, and that's why love what I do in energy and infrastructure and digital assets. You got to surround yourself by good people. Fundamentally, people who want to do things the right way, and that's incredibly important. If you do things the right way, I was just talking to somebody in Denver this week. You're negotiating. It's a tough negotiation, but it can be done in a way that's, hey, Scott, we disagree. You don't want to sell the business. We'll go in different directions, but we are all good, right? Like you really want to make sure that your primary goal in life, in business, or obviously personal life, but even in business, you are known as somebody who, you do the right things, right? You stand up for your people, and when you negotiate hard, but you do the right thing at the end of the day.
The ability to size someone up, right? Because you have limited information
Yes.
on humans, right? And then when you're doing business with people, do you have any tell? I've got one major tell that tells me I don't want to do business with someone or I don't want to work with them, and that tell is if they talk poorly about their spouse. If you talk poorly about your spouse, you're probably not a good person, right? It's I have like a top 10. That's in my top 3 in terms of we're not going to work together. Do you have any things that you have picked up along the way that you're like, yeah, that doesn't smell right, or something's not going to go right here?
One of the things is, do you have people that you've worked with for a while, right? Are people do people like to work with you?
Yeah, they
It's
keep coming back too. Yeah.
Yes, yes. So I think how you treat your own people, and you can be tough on people, but at the end of the day, if people feel you're fair and you share sort of wealth or exposure, even a lot of the times you're in a meeting, and that's something that I really started to pay attention to, is do you allow your team to speak up in meetings? And the people who don't allow the team to speak up in meetings, what does it show about them, right? Are they afraid that they're going to get exposed, that they don't know enough about the topic or whatever, right? And so that's another piece when you're in meetings. Is Scott, who is part of your team, actually speaking as well, or are you just speaking and everybody else is quiet?
Yeah, I also that my another tell to that point is the over talking. You ever someone who's when they try to instead of just it's an argument of facts, it ends up being an argument of voice tone, right? And they start over talking someone, and it drives me up the wall. But it's also probably a tell that there's probably an ego issue there or whatever. And again, that's also another thing that I'll deal with. If you have an ego issue, we're not going to deal with business. We're
Yes.
not because it won't be about facts. It'll be about, I feel this way or feel that way, and facts don't care about your feelings.
100%. 100% agree.
Awesome. Okay, wait. So let me see if I can eke out one more. Do you have any more things? So I love the idea that that if you meet someone, you can kind of go through their LinkedIn profile and like, wait a minute, they've been in business for 25 years. They've only got like 2 or 3 people that have been there more than 3 years. That's
Yes.
probably an issue if you have more than 10 to 20 employees. I like that a lot. I'm writing that down. Do you have any more kind of things that, when you meet them, you're like, nah, or any kind of smell test that this doesn't feel right, once you start kind of getting into with them? And I only asked because, you've got crazy experience, the amount of experience, and you've probably done hundreds, maybe thousands of deals. I would imagine you can smell bullshit a mile away, right? What are those kind of tells? Because it just is. When you're in business, you got to be careful who you deal with.
Obviously, this is obvious. This is also something you can use in, personal life when you go on a date and the other person, sort of, especially for guys, if he spends the whole evening talking about himself, it's probably not a good partner there. And so, it's when you get into the room and you have somebody who just, focused on themselves and their own career and is not curious about what you do, and I mean, a lot of the times, I mean, for me, it's sort of interesting. I'm obviously in a world of men mostly. The other day, my son was watching my Zoom calls, and it's like 20 guys on Zoom. And he's like, do you like work with women? I'm like, I don't even realize it. Like that's all I've done in life. So I kind of feel like I'm a guy because that's all I see. But when you get into the room and people are not curious about, have you actually done real things? Sometimes I'm mistaken for somebody who sets up meetings and, brings coffees. And so, for me personally, and I get it. I get it. I probably would have that, sort of subconscious bias as well myself, just because it's a law of numbers. It's very simple. But, are people curious about you and truly kind of understand what you've done in your life? So, the over talking, over focused on themselves, is somebody who the people I've met in my life who really were accomplished, whether they done great things or made money or, contributed to society in any way, they don't have to mention anything, right? It sort of comes naturally throughout the conversation. They're like, wow, I didn't realize like you are amazing. Like, why didn't you tell me that in the first 60 seconds we met. So,
because they don't have to.
um,
They don't
exactly,
have to, right? They
exactly.
don't feel compelled, and it's I really like that. My wife says that a lot. If someone has there's a lack of curiosity about people around them, there's something wrong with them. If there's no curiosity at all about how about how anybody got somewhere or whatever, that's probably an issue. Oh my god, I love both those. Okay, yeah, that you crushed that. So okay, so what is your ultimate goal in the future? Are you just going to be the kind of founder of organizations, or are you kind of where you're going to be for a while?
We are really facing, I think, in our entire economy, ecosystem, Scott, globally, a really exciting change. I mean, I thought, the shale boom was super exciting, right? I mean, US becoming the biggest producer of oil and gas globally, 25% of
Crazy. Yeah.
energy is produced in the United States. And a lot of the times folks don't are not aware of that. We talk about OPEC and OPEC, setting the
Who's
prices.
OPEC? Who's OPEC, right? They have no power anymore. They have to raise the prices, lower prices. Who cares? Who cares? And they're producing a bunch of sour crude anyway, right? So it's not like that's used to be how we would take their gross crude. Not anymore. We've been getting most of our crude from Canada for a while though, right?
Yeah, and domestic production. I mean, we are
Right.
25% of production globally. So who is going to be really setting the price, right? If price goes down, the US is the marginal producer. And, the US activity is also very flexible. Those projects are not, a decade in planning. There are months in planning. So you can shut in and out production, very quickly. But where I see myself and where I see the Dynamics platform going is we are seeing obviously an enormous change in terms of demand coming not only from you and I, retail customers for power. You are seeing competition obviously from one, electrification, right? But more importantly, data centers and AI. So if you and I want to continue to use ChatGPT and all the cool AI apps that you and I probably don't know, but our kids know, the biggest constraint to the growth of AI is power. And how is power produced? It's going to be, fossil fuels and all other sources of energy, obviously, nuclear and renewables and others. And so that is an incredibly transformational addition to the demand for energy. And the third piece, obviously, digital assets, Bitcoin, obviously, extremely energy heavy. And so you have two other contenders for sort of power demand and energy demand. And, that's something that we've done for 2 decades. We've had successes, we've had failures, we've learned a ton. But we feel that that's a space where we can really add a ton of value over the next, 2, 3 decades of my personal existence. And hopefully Dynamics is going to be, much longer than that. We can play an incredibly important role because, again, those two facets, digital assets and AI, is essentially constrained by energy. And that's where we come from. And energy is, and I don't want to diminish here the role of technology at all. I don't mean to sound, so derogative at all, but if app goes down, doesn't generally kill people. But, if power or energy or mining, if something goes wrong, I mean, this is lives at stake. This is very serious business. So you need to have people who've built large facilities, dealt with many different kinds of people all over the world, and deployed a lot of capital with very large, commercial and retail customer counterparties, people who know what they are doing at the, driving wheel. This is not a little project that if it goes sideways, doesn't
Yeah.
cost a lot of money.
People will die, and people will
Yes,
die unless this works
yes,
all the time.
yes.
Infrastructure is no joke. Andrejka, we're out of time. I'm going to take that last sentence and probably use that as the promo because it's exciting. Yeah, people die unless you get this right the first time. Thank you very much for doing this. It was absolutely glorious to meet you.
Scott, thank you. And excited about what's to come for the next 20, 30 years in energy and infra and power.